Hello, I can't believe we're finally here to discuss this book, the big book of whole school well-being. I've been trying to bring the four editors together for about 5 or 6 months now, Frederika. And sadly, Kimberly has had to drop out today, but I do already have an interview recorded with Kimberly, which I'll put a link to at the end of this interview. So welcome to Frederika, who I first met in 2016 when we did Virgin Boom together to try and promote growing business. We were voted into the top 100 growth companies in Britain at the time, I think, by popular vote.
Something like that.
And Frederika is a master brain architect of education, deeply understanding all the issues, helping to run projects in schools where teachers become researchers on education well-being, working on her doctorate. What's your organisation if people want to contact you, Frederika?
Educate to Flourish.
Educate to Flourish, okay.
Yeah.
And we also have Bukky Yusuf today, who is renowned across all the social circles in education for amazing work in technology in education, helping schools to develop strategic plans for IT that really reflect and nourish the real world of education and all the issues of students thriving and having well-being on the front line, making sure that it all knits together. Welcome, Bukky. How are you today?
Welcome. No, thanks for having me. Yeah, glad. Great. And the sun is out, so feeling even more positive and better.
How do people contact you if they're looking for you?
Okay, so primarily LinkedIn, Bukky Yusuf, quite easily. Yeah. You can contact me on Twitter as well, unhelpfully with my Twitter handle of @Rondell10_B. Or yeah, those are the two main things. I'm on social media.
Subtitle on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Thérèse is an expert on child well-being in the school community and working with the adults who work with children to ensure that they know how to nurture that culture that's so important post-lockdown when behaviour in the schoolyard is a major issue. Thérèse is your person, and also working on circle time in classrooms, which is incredibly important when children are now struggling with issues associated with the Ukraine war and want to talk about it and need to talk about. Hello, Thérèse. What's your website and what should I have added to that description?
ThérèseHoyle.com.
Okay.
So it's easy to find as long as you know how to spell my name.
Oh yeah, and I'm just looking at my notes. You also wrote a book, 101 Playground Games. Is that right?
Yeah, no, a couple of books, 101 Playground Games and 101 Wet Playtime Games. And I'm contributing author to How to Be a Peaceful School. I've got a chapter in there on how to create a peaceful playground.
Okay, thank you. So let's get stuck into this. I think this is a fantastic book, really, really fantastic book. And I'm so delighted you're here today to talk about it. I previously interviewed Steve Waters about this book, which was forensic case studies of what's going on in schools that are focusing on staff well-being. Now, this is different because you've really broken down all the areas of whole school well-being. So we've got a section on leadership with chapters on different aspects of that, a section on teachers, a section on the students, a section on whole school engagement between different people in the school and with the wider staff community, the parental community, and so on. And finally, a section on inclusion, of different aspects of inclusion, which is so vital to whole school well-being. Everyone's got to be included. We've got to be out there for the whole community. So, Frederika, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the book and how you expect schools to use this book?
Yes, absolutely. Well, thanks for the great introduction to the book and the way you've showcased the sections. And we were really keen for this to be a very practical book that people could use to actually implement whole school well-being. So the reason we have the different sections is that not all chapters would necessarily immediately appeal to everybody, but if you're a school leader, you might jump more into the leadership section. If you're a teacher, you might jump more into the teacher well-being section or into the educate well section. but there should be something in there for everybody. And what we've done is each chapter follows a very clear structure so that you know exactly what to expect. So it tells you the what, so it gives you a very brief summary of what the chapter's about. So you can read that and see, is this chapter something that I want to look at next? So you don't have to read it front to back, cover to cover. You can dip in and out of bits that are relevant. Then it gives you the why, the rationale, why that particular aspect is so important. And then the main section of each chapter is the how. So it gives you the very practical steps and tools you can take to implement that particular aspect of whole school well-being. And then, crucially, there is a final section in each chapter that says over to you. And each author has done it slightly differently, but each over to you section has some very clear guidelines, pointers. Sometimes it's questions, sometimes it's checklists. It depends how it ties in with each chapter, but inviting the reader to actually, and you know, we're saying if you've got it as a paper book as opposed to an electronic one, scribble in it, you know, and if you've got it as an ebook, then have a notebook by your side that you can use to dedicate to making notes on this, and make notes about it. Use that over to you section to actually decide what are going to be my next steps as a result of reading this particular chapter. And so my biggest advice would actually be, don't try and read the book all the way in one go and then just put it away and forget all about it. Take one chapter at a time, digest it, go to the over to you section, set yourself some actions, take those actions, then move on to what else you can do.
And you've talked about that as being a very personal journey for the person reading the book. But I can imagine this as being a focus of staff meetings. Maybe once a month, this whole staff focus on a chapter and talk about it and have a collective discussion about it and make some plans. I mean, you'd need someone in the school who's got oversight of that and is keeping an eye on the overall journey. Would you recommend it that way?
I think that's a great idea, actually. And I could see that you could have some project groups coming out of that to work on specific areas of implementation. And I think it would be a really great way for a school to review their well-being strategy and to put some tangible action points. What, I don't know, Bukky, Thérèse, have you got anything else? Any other thoughts on that?
Yes, I think also as well, a whole school perspective, of course, it has to be. Otherwise, it becomes piecemeal, it becomes tick boxy. It's not wedded into the thread of what the school is about and meaningfully moving well-being for everybody. Now, the caveat obviously is well-being means different things to everybody. So I think before we proceed with this book, it's very clear there has to be an institution-led or an organization-led understanding about what well-being means, and more importantly, what it means to the individual people. So because I just think what makes this book powerful is the fact that you can look at it from an organizational viewpoint, you know, the leadership aspects, but also down to an individual viewpoint as well. If you're working in an organization where there may be some things that are getting way in a meaningfully strategic whole school well-being plan, for whatever reason, this book still gives you the guidelines to take care of your own well-being in the meantime as well. So there's a sliding scale, I think, about how you can actually use it from the collective, a whole school organization-wide, right down to the individual, wherever, even with if an individual is a parent or a student as well.
And Fred and I are actually both working with a school at the moment, Leo Academies, and their CEO has bought the book for, I think it's every member of staff, is that right, Fred? Which actually, as a school, or as an academy trust, that would be huge in terms of developing wellbeing across the trust. Actually amazing. So it'd be, you know, in terms of if everybody's reading the same book with the same message, then you can, you know, like Fred's chapter is about creating a whole school wellbeing environment. So actually, you know, for schools and academy trusts to actually focus on that, and it might be they do what, you know, once a half term, or it might be they get together in inset training and just say, you know, with this half term we're going to be focusing on this particular aspect. Yeah, it can have a huge impact.
Yeah, well, actually, I think they've gone even further than that. So the Leo Academy Trust, who are amazing in terms of, and actually in terms of EdTech, Bukky, that the stuff that they do as well is phenomenal. And And they're in the Challenge Partners group, and within Challenge Partners, they are in a hub with the Sutton Education Trust. And I only found out about this by chance, seeing tweets appearing, but it does appear that yes, on recommendation from the CEO of the Leo Academy Trust, who's been working with me and now also with Thérèse for quite some time, and he actually wrote a beautiful endorsement of our book as well, as part of the hub, the Sutton Trust and the Sutton Education Trust and Leo Academy Trust, that they gave all their staff a bundle of 3 books over the last half term, I think, and one of them was ours. So it's
I think
amazing.
that's such a strong statement by leadership teams in a school or an academy trust to invest in this for all their staff. And obviously that's a relatively modest investment, but it's a statement. Read this, we're going to have conversations. I'm going to just insert here my other key thing that I think it's essential schools do for whole school well-being is that in the staff toilets, they need to have 3 posters. And I took a picture recently of a school I've been working in recently, 3 posters, one about staff well-being, how to recognize if you're not okay and what to do, one about child well-being, how to recognize if you're not okay and what to do, and one about colleague well-being. 3 posters in the toilet, where you sit down, where you're likely to need them.
No, it is. I do think I've been a huge advocate of toilet information and jokes and things over the year, because it's a place where we can spend a reasonable amount of time. So it's also about making our bathrooms really attractive for our staff as well, having nice smelly things to nurture our staff teams.
Okay, thank you for this. It sounds like it's just such a good book to work with. Before we leave this interview, I just want each of you to reflect on your journey as editors of this book and tell me a little bit about what you learned along the way that you're just really grateful to have learned through the process of reading and editing the chapters. Thérèse, you're on screen. Would you like to start?
Yeah, I just think it's been an incredible journey. It's really hard to narrow down any particular chapter because they all have so much content, and I think we've got character strength through to whole school well-being, through to individual well-being. So when I came to read the book, it was the end of the summer, and I got to find I've been working on with the leadership chapters, and I got to read the collective book, and I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I cannot believe that we have collectively written a book and there's nobody's got the same research, everything was different in it. And I think that's what's been quite incredible, having 22 authors where actually every chapter has huge impact and every chapter brings something and there's no overlap. And I think, really looking at individual well-being in terms of, so many teachers at the moment are really exhausted. So we've got chapters where, a teacher or a senior leader or a lunchtime supervisor can go and think, oh, I'm feeling really tired. It's the end of term. Actually, I can dip into this chapter, together with our school leaders who can actually dip into a chapter about, how do we create whole school well-being? Oh, this is what we can do, to inclusion. And I just think there's so much in it that actually you could spend the next 2 or 3 years reading that book. But for me, it is that I think everybody's brought so much richness. It's a very enriching book for any school team.
I would definitely agree with that. As we swapped from author to author, it was really refreshing and constantly engaging. You just never guessed where the next person was going to come from. And although you say you could spend 2 or 3 years reading it, I wouldn't like that to come across as it being a long book that you would need 2 or 3 years to.
No, you don't need 2 or 3 years to read it, but I think you could embed it over a 2-year period, perhaps, if you're looking at well-being.
You guys have done a brilliant work as editors. There's obviously been a ruthless approach to word count. It's each chapter, you could kind of read it out loud at the beginning of a staff meeting. It is so succinct and so pared down so that there's no excess words in there.
And I think what is nice is you can quite quickly read a chapter. It's like, I've got 20 minutes. Oh, actually, I can read that chapter in 20 minutes. And that is what's nice. And I can I can go away with something that really is going to make a difference in my practice and for myself personally too.
Cool. Over to you, Bukky. What did you learn by your process of editing this book?
Well, I learned that I have a team of phenomenal editors, and I know we were described as that because I contracted, in the process of all of this, I contracted COVID-19 really badly, and I was sick in bed for about 3.5 weeks. But that did not actually slow down what we were trying to do as well. The editors were phenomenal and are all well-being experts in their field, and I just think it has been touched upon before. The breadth and perspective they bring to well-being is just so powerful. But what I also learned is how something so phenomenal could have been produced and we didn't even meet each other in face-to-face. It was all done virtually. And as an EdTech advocate, that, I love that particular element. There were so many different chapters. I agree with what Thérèse said about the fact that, it would be something you would want to revisit on a regular basis, but you can read each chapter within 15 minutes and still have a personal or even school-based plan that you're going to implement. But with the particular chapters that I read, one particular chapter, that stuck out with me because of my interest in burnout, not being able, I'm one of these type of people that I don't always recognize signs of burnout. It's obviously everyone else, but not to me. And Steve Waters, Steve Waters' Water Teacher Burnout Index is a really powerful, I think, frame, because it has 12 steps where it actually outlines the behavior and emotions that you may display that indicates where you are in terms of burnout. And I think it's a very powerful framework and something that really resonated with me. But that's just for my own personal preference. I really and genuinely say this, there is something in this book for everyone, depending on whether you're a leader, teacher, parent. And I think that's what makes this book really powerful. There's something in it depending on where you are in your wellbeing journey.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo back to you the caliber of you guys as editors, and also of many of these authors. I'm well networked on LinkedIn, and you're all people who are clearly masters in your field and hugely respected, judging by the networks of peers and also the comments I've heard you all make over the years. It's just really, really well thought through. And yes, Steve Waters, I've already interviewed. I'll put a link to my interview with him at the end of this video as well, because he is a phenomenal contributor to this field. Thank you, Bukky. Frederika, back to you. What are your thoughts on what you've learned from this?
Well, Thérèse and Bukky have already covered some really important points, and I would like to reiterate really that the teamwork that's gone into it has been absolutely phenomenal, not just from us four, and we've worked very, very closely together without ever meeting, but also with pulling together so many people at a time when they were so busy, and actually everybody has contributed phenomenally. And the importance when you do publish of choosing a really good publisher as well, and having a great editorial team there, because we were in the very fortunate position of having two to choose from. And I think ultimately we would have had a great relationship with either, but we were so happy with the team that we chose and the support they gave us, because none of us had actually done an editorial work like this before. So actually they were really good at kind of bouncing ideas off. But in terms of the content, what I really took away is I found it really interesting, because I considered myself somebody who, when it comes to inclusion, was fairly enlightened. Thinking about disability, I've worked very closely for a number of years with one of our authors, actually Liz Wright, who was born with limb difference. We have traveled the world together, so I've had quite a good insight, working with her, traveling, staying in hotel rooms with her, of what that disability means to her in terms of her everyday life. And I have a daughter who is LGBTQ+. So I feel I have a fairly good insight into that as well as a parent, and from everything she tells me about her friendship group, who have very diverse LGBTQ+ backgrounds. However, I still found that the Include Well section taught me an awful lot, actually, about inclusion and how different that looks for different people. Yeah, thanks for holding that up. And also, actually, the chapter by Adele Bates on LGBTQ+ for staff and for pupils in terms of well-being. Some of the things that, even as the mother of a daughter who has those experiences, I'd never really fully appreciated how sometimes just going for a job interview or walking into a staff room might mean mean that you have to ask questions to test the waters to see how safe you are. And so it was really eye-opening. And on that, I just want to say why we included an include well section, because we debated that. We thought, well, shouldn't inclusion just be all the way through? You know, if for well-being is for everybody in whole school, shouldn't it be implicit in every chapter? And we thought, well, yes, but inclusion is still not as implicit as it should be, and therefore we wanted to actually highlight that as a separate section as well.
Thank you so much. Now, just to wrap up this interview, there's a couple of big questions floating around in the background, and I'm going to have a go at narrating them and answering them. And you are all welcome to jump in if you have any thoughts as I take on that challenge. One is that schools are often saying, look, we've got huge well-being issues and we know what we are. We have to prioritise just reacting to the fact that we're 6 staff down just now, and we've got to, if we're going to have well-being in our school, we've got to deal with that rather than engaging with the book. And we are going from crisis to crisis in this way. And my suggestion would be that you create this commitment to the book to run through staff meetings or in sets over 2 or 3 years. And when issues like that come at the school, you just prioritise them and put this aside for a while and just extend your commitment to coming back to it. And with some of them, it's worth glancing through this book and seeing if there's some insight here as you try to deal with those issues. But it just is the way of our world that sometimes it can't be pre-written. You've just got to respond to it in the moment. Would you agree with that? I
would add to that to say that if you make a commitment to whole school well-being, it is a journey. It does take time, but actually, okay, it might not help you right now immediately with dealing with the issue that you're firefighting on, but actually the more you commit to whole school well-being, the more you have structures in place, the more it's absolutely part of the fabric of your school, the better buffered you are in future when crisis points come, and more crisis points will always come. So yeah.
Rebecca, I work with Optimus Education on their Wellbeing Award for schools, and it is, my schools often say, you know, wellbeing is at the heart of everything we do. So actually, if we've got high numbers of staff off sick, which we have done with COVID, we also need to look at staff wellbeing. So there's a great chapter in the book around staff wellbeing. But yeah, we have to, you know, if we're getting, you know, it's a very different climate right now. We know that, but actually there are some schools who historically have had high sickness rates. So if we look at that, then we have to think about, well, what's, you know, where we need to plug these systems up. Something's not right here for us to be, our retention, you know, people leaving and our staff sickness rates being low, you know, are high rather. So actually sometimes the information's, we've got the information as a school, but we need to do something, and we need to be thinking about all those structures, like Fred just said, that we've got in our school to actually support our school. And as we've all said, it's not about being tokenistic. It isn't about the, you know, the cakes on a Friday. It is at a much deeper level. And there's a word that's come up a lot in the work I'm doing at the moment about psychological safety. We need to make sure that our schools are psychologically safe as well. So when in a staff meeting, and I know this is spoken about in the chapters, you know, when somebody says something that others don't just roll their eyes, because that's not going to make it safe for us to actually express ourselves and take risks as a staff too. And for children, it's exactly the same, isn't it, about creating safe classroom cultures. It's, yeah.
Thank you, Thérèse. And as we wrap this up, my final big question, that is something I've talked about a lot on my YouTube channel over recent years, is that how do you create staff wellbeing and child wellbeing if if staff are prevented from having input into policy and the policy and tests and strategies that they're having to roll out? And talking to you all before the interview, it was great to chat to you, Bukky, because you have been involved with the Department for Education on IT, and it's wonderful to hear that that engagement is really going on, because I complain about the fact it's not really been going on in maths education. So I'm going to try and answer that question. I've just already recorded a video this morning, which I'll edit and get live before this one goes live, which encouraged people to sign my petition about the multiplication tables check. And this is really a petition that's about getting consultation going again in school testing and school policy. If we can break through on this one, then we've got a new Secretary of State for education. Hopefully he's going to create a different culture in the department that addresses some of that lack of consultation that's been going on. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, can I add to that as well? I think, things like doing action research in schools, which is something that I support people to do through Educate to Flourish, but any school can do that, and getting involved, as Bukky has been doing, and as we all have on some level, in really shouting about what we do, about what we know, things like writing books, contributing chapters to books, contributing articles to publications, etc. Anything that we can put out there that evidences that this stuff works is going to help, because we need to bring that to the attention of policymakers, and the way we do that is by providing that evidence base. And the other thing that I would say on that is, I had a point there and it's just completely gone, about the evidence base. It's gone. It'll come back after we've done
this.
Does it link
to what you do in teaching schools how to do their own action research and the services you provide at all? Which
I'd mentioned that, but I'm happy to mention that again. But that wasn't. What I do is actually through Educate to Flourish, I work with staff in schools to design their projects on their action research projects around wellbeing. I teach them about research methods, and I help them guide them, and then pull together a report with their individual reports on that, which you can find on the Educate to Flourish website. But now I was trying to think of a kind of wider point that I was making there about how we evidence that research and how we actually bring it to the attention of policymakers, and it's just completely gone. It's on the tip of my tongue, and it's really
one thing I would
frustrating.
want to say was, are you all engaged, apart from writing this amazing book and the other books that you've written between you, are you engaged with the Chartered College of Teaching?
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
Because there are amazing conversations going on there. I did work during the coalition government to try and challenge some of the problems with education policy that were going on. And one of the few things that's still standing from those discussions is the Chartered College of Teaching, which is absolutely flourishing now, where those involved are having these discussions. And if a Secretary of State for Education chooses to build a consultation, it's an amazing place to look for that expert capacity and the knowledge base, and to connect in with educators who can contribute.
And of course, they always put out opportunities to publish articles in their publication as well. But I've thought of what the thing was that I was going to say, actually, which is, don't get too hung up on trying to influence the DFE either, because actually some of the most amazing schools that do great things in education are doing so by just doing their own thing and going, we know this works, we're going to do it, and it's going to be fine. And they actually, you see evidence over and over again that you would think that Ofsted would hate what they're doing, that they would get downgraded, but actually they do their own thing, they get the results, and Ofsted praise them, so I would say, don't be afraid of thinking this doesn't fit into the box of what policy says we should be doing. If you know that the evidence base is there, that doing stuff around well-being, and the evidence base is vast, that supporting well-being actually does support all those other measurable outcomes, that schools are measured on, that children will learn better, that you'll have better staff retention, all of these things that are very well evidenced, then just do it. And you will actually find that it might take, a few years to get to where you want to be, but be brave, stick to your convictions and do it, and it will work and it will pay off.
Can I add to that really briefly? Working in a special school on a part-time basis as senior leader, one of the really powerful things before we had COVID, so this was before March 2020, was my head teacher realised that we had to have a very strong and robust wellbeing focus. So at the start of the academic year, we had someone externally coming in to talk about, so that everybody, including the senior leaders, could be involved in the discussion and being honest and open about our vulnerabilities, in terms of what we needed on an individual basis to enhance our well-being, but also what we needed on a collective basis to enhance our well-being, so that it is important for us to take care of that, because in order to do the roles that we have to do by vulnerable people that we work with, young people we work with, our well-being must be as strong as it possibly can be. And that means being vigilant of ourselves, being vigilant of others, stepping in. So when you talk about, for example, we've had high staff absences for, I've lost track of how many weeks, how many months now. But because of that core focus on well-being. And it's not just about the policies, it's about living it, and really head teachers and senior leaders demonstrating this is real. So it's about touching base with staff before you have your briefing, cutting meetings short at the end of the day so that everyone actually can go home because you can see we've had a hard day, or like listening to the staff and building in things in assemblies so that we can all talk about like things that are going around the world and how it impacts upon us. It's those little things, but unless you've got, again, I will talk about the strategic aspect. Without a strategy, it becomes nice, but it's not meaningful, and you can't sustain it for a long time as well. So I can talk about that from a, it's not to say it's perfect, but it's worked for us. But understanding your community and providing an opportunity and space to talk about well-being and what it means, I think is a vital step.
Yeah, strategy is definitely needed. So now it's time for me to bring this to a close, because we're all women. We need to get out and nurture our own well-being today instead of just talking about looking after other people. I'm certainly off to go and watch my son in a school show. So I'm so grateful for your time. That has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's an absolute privilege to have had this time with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have time together as well as an editorial group and talk about